Testing 1 2, testing 1 2. Welcome back. You're on the Q with Q for another episode of Q the Mind. I'm your host, Quentin Harris, and today's episode is called Assumptions Without Context Are Dangerous. Assumptions without context are dangerous. And I'm very excited. This is episode 8. This is the very last episode of the series from impulsive to intentional. It's been a great ride. I'm very happy that I went ahead and dove in and started this, podcast. What is it now? Rolling in on about 6 months ago. And so over the last 6 months, we've knocked out 8 episodes. We will have more coming down the road. I need to sit back and just take a break and figure out, hey, what's next, and what else do we want to lean into? And so I've been giving that some thought, but very excited for what we've been able to do with this podcast. The folks that have reached generated well over 5,000 views just on YouTube alone with the podcast and countless views between LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook and other platforms. So we're excited for what we've been able to do with it. This has been powered by Hybrid Focus Consulting, my consulting brand. And the idea here is to be able to help folks continue to lead intentional lives and be better at critical thinking. And so, really feel good about what we've been able to accomplish. And so again, today's topic is about assumptions and how they can be very dangerous without context. And so the story for today takes me back about 15 years ago, very early on in my career. And I found myself in a situation where the organization that I was working for at the time, someone was let go. And they didn't work on the same site that I was on, but there was a lot of noise around it, a lot of it. And, a lot of conversations were happening. People were upset. And I found myself jumping into those conversations and not from a place of recklessness, but I did speak confidently as if I knew the entire story. And what I didn't realize is that there were things that I did not know. And that was the moment that really showed me. And at that time, I wouldn't have thought of this. But again, going back to our title, Assumptions Without Context is Dangerous. And so that is going to take us directly into our formula for today. So we're going to kick it off with our fact piece. And so what is undeniably true here? And the reality of it is that people make assumptions every day. And it goes beyond just us within our careers. We make assumptions within our relationships. We make assumptions with friends. We make assumptions with our family. We can people watch and see people that we don't even know, and we can make assumptions about what we think about them, who we think they may be. I think of the old saying that don't judge a book by its cover, right? And you look at the cover of a book and you can immediately assume, this is what this is going to be about. And it is very easy to do that. But the reality is most decisions we observe come with context that we are not actually privy to. And so I wanted to do a little bit of research on this. And there was 2 things that I was able to dig up that I found to be very, very interesting. And so, the 2 of them are cognitive closure and psychological contracts. So I'm going to read a couple of things here. And so research in decision-making psychology shows that people have a natural need for certainty. Ari Kruglansky calls the need for cognitive closure, and which means when we don't have full information, we tend not to pause, but we conclude. And so we tend to write the end of the story of whatever it is that we need closure to without going and getting the actual information. The second point is around psychological contract. In organizational behavior, there's something called the psychological contract. Study across workplace research, which explains how employees create unspoken expectations. And when those expectations aren't met, it leads to frustration, even if nothing is formally promised. This idea was introduced by Chris Argyris in the early 60s, and then Denise Rosu doubled down and expanded on this research almost 30 years later towards the end of the 1980s. And so, what this is telling us is that within work, in these places, like, one, there's a need for closure, but there's also this idea of this when they talk about unspoken expectations, and if those expectations are not met. As leaders, is very important to be mindful about what we're putting out there, as well as followers, as those who are not yet in leadership positions. It is important for us to go and get clarity. And we're going to talk about how both of those lenses fit in a little bit later in this episode. So that is fact, okay? And so just understanding that the decisions we observe come with context that we are often not privy to. And this is very realistic the further down the food chain you are. Within my current organization, I sit at the director level. And so I'm kind of like middle of the pack. You got senior directors, you got executive leadership, you have our president. But below me, you have the managers, you have the leads, and you have entry level, right? And so there's information that I'm privy to that others are not. And there's information that I'm not privy to that I have to be mindful, like, okay, I don't have the full context here. And so before I jump to any conclusions, either I need to go and seek out the context that I need, if that context is available, or I just need to sit and wait. And there's patience that comes with that, as well as leader maturity. And so with that, we're going to move into fluency. What deeper understanding must we develop? And so there are a few layers here that I want to get to under this. So the first layer that we're going to talk about is incomplete information creates false confidence. And so back then, when this whole situation happened years and years ago, I spoke based on what I knew. And a lot of what I knew was actually the truth, but it was only a fraction of the truth. And once I had learned that there had been an internal investigation, once again, at that time, I'm very much entry level, and in the senior leadership had done an investigation on this thing, my entire perspective shifted on that. And that wasn't just new information to me, but it was miscontext that would have reshaped the original response that I gave when I joined in the noise, right? And so not having that context caused me to take a step back. And part of me, in many ways, felt embarrassed a little bit, because it was like, man, I didn't share my opinions about this, and I joined in the talk and the chatter. My current leader calls it the water cooler talk. And so, like, I've joined in here, and yet there was context that I was not privy to. So this was a very valuable lesson for me very early on. And then here's layer 2. Assumptions are often emotionally fueled. And so at the time, I had my own subtle disagreements with some of the things that were happening within the organization. And it was nothing that was major, but that was also a source of internal tension that allowed me to kind of speak from a place in which I was influenced by how I felt. And so keep in mind, none of this is factual. I'm going from an internal feeling I have based on things that I do not agree with. And so this is not a place of me operating from facts. So when the situation happened, those feelings influence. And again, assumptions can be dangerous. And so that's important. Assumptions are not always logical in nature. They very much can be emotional, and they can be fueled based on how we're already feeling or how we have felt in the past. Layer 3. Expectations without agreement can lead to disappointment. And so we talked about that psychological contract. And from this point, if you fast forward to my career, I remember I was speaking with a colleague, and they were asking me, like, hey, how have you, stay with the organization, and how have you managed frustration? How have you allowed yourself to remain in a space of positivity, even when, you have moments of up and down? It never seems like you're impacted by anything that's going on. And my response was simple, but I do believe that it is very much important, in that I've been able to master this within my own career, and I always was not here. But what I did tell them is that there's always going to be something that you do not agree with. And it doesn't matter where you are. You could be at organization A, B, or C, but there's always going to be something that comes down you may not agree with at the time. And what's very important is that the danger can often come in when folks go over and beyond, or they extend themselves beyond what they're prepared to, and they expect something that has not been expressed or promised to them. And so never extend yourself beyond a place that you are willing to go if you expect something in return that you have not gotten clarity on from your leadership. That's very important. And so that is a leadership metric that you have to align with it for yourself, because that is an unspoken expectation. And so it goes back to that psychological contract piece that we talked about under fact. So let's move on to function. How do we apply this understanding? And so this is where, this whole series is about from moving from impulsiveness to being intentional. So from impulsive to intentional. And this is how we lean into that intentionality piece. So the first thing that I would say under function, how do we apply this, is label the assumption. When you find yourself in a place where you can almost feel pushed to make an assumption about something, you have to tell yourself, hey, this is an assumption. I do not have all the facts. It is okay to predict, but you have to align with the fact that I don't have all of the information that I need here to essentially give a full story. That alone will help you refrain from having impulsive reactions. The second thing is to seek context before you speak. Commentary can be detrimental if you speak it from a place of assumption. So before speaking, before hopping online, before venting, before posting anything, it's good to say, what don't I know? Ask yourself that. Next is, who has more information than I do? There's always somebody that has a little bit more knowledge. And then lastly, what can exist behind the scenes? What is it that maybe no one knows, right? That has not been made public as of yet. And from there, that'll help you align on how you should move. And then the last thing is separate effort from entitlement. I think, depending on where you are, there can always be a little like, oh, I have tenure, or I've been here a long time, or this person owes me. Separate that entitlement piece. And if you go the extra mile and you do this intentionally and you don't be transactional about it, if you expect a return, clarify what you expect, document it that has been said, and then align yourself on it. Make sure that what you are doing aligns with all of those things that have come beforehand. Otherwise, again, you're operating in that assumption place, and this is not in a place of agreement. And one additional point that I make here is maintain professional boundaries at all times. That's very, very important. Passion without boundaries will lead to burnout in some cases. And so if you start assuming like, oh, they should see me, or they should recognize me, they owe me, or this isn't fair. Hey, man, within the work that I do, we operate, based on role charters, and we operate based on a place of, this is the job that you have to do. We have seasons, and so those charters can change based off the season we're in. If I decide to do something extra outside of my charter, that is because it's for the love of the work that I do. But it does not come with the expectation that, hey, I should be getting X, Y, and Z. So that's very important. As a leader, protect, people from their own assumptions. And so that's one of the things that I have to do. I remember I had a young person up under my wing, and they had this drive, like, give me more. And they wanted to lean very much outside of the space that they were supposed to be in. And I appreciated the fervency. It was great. But I had to let them know also, it's like, hey, I shield you from some things because you're in a honeymoon phase right now. And it's very easy for you to get pulled in. And I'm like, once you come out of that honeymoon phase, I don't also want to become reliant on this additional fervency, because you may hit burnout quicker than what I expect. And so it's my job as a leader to anticipate, like, okay, I've given them a little bit extra here. They wanted to do a little bit extra more there, but also I'm also going to, temper how much of that I give you to be able to foresee, or to be able to be watchful and observing of that person's burnout. And so that is also important. So I don't want to hinder ambition, but I also want to prevent burnout at the same time. And, I've been in the workforce 12 to 15 years longer than this person. And so, this is not something that they would potentially see. I remember who I was at that age. And so it's very important to always, as a leader, have that lens of reflective thinking while also thinking ahead. Now, we have talked about fact. we've talked about fluency, and we've talked about function. Next, we're going to go into freedom. What does this unlock internally? When you stop assuming and start seeking context, there are four things that you gain. The first one is clarity. You respond based on truth and not emotion. The next one is control. You manage your reactions instead of reacting impulsively. Three is credibility. Your words carry weight because they're grounded. Like you've gotten that clarity, right? And so now you're like, I'm clear on what it is. Let me think this all the way through. And so when you do speak, it's coming from a place of credible information. And lastly, consistency. You're not swinging for the fences for everything that happens. You know, you have the correct narrative. And so this helps you from moving again to intentionality instead of being impulsive. And that's essentially what this entire series has been about. And I would say this is one of the major things that I have seen over my career. You know, even outside of like what I do within my career, but also within my businesses as a consultant, within starting a business, it's very easy for folks to fall into an assumption place. And it's important to make sure that we have as much of the data that we can have, so that way we can make the proper decisions. And so when we act from a place of impulsivity based on how we feel, because remember, it comes from emotions most of the time, that's what the cause for concern can lead to. So we have touched on the 4F formula: fact, fluency, function, and freedom. From here, we're going to move into our scripture and Robert Greene lens. I'm going to start with scripture first. Our favorite book, Proverbs 18 and 13. It says, "He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him." Folly is another word for foolishness. And so again, he who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. So it is very important to listen first and speak last. This verse isn't just about speaking, it's about understanding before you conclude. So that's our scriptural lens. Then let's look at the Robert Greene concept. This is coming from his book, The Laws of Human Nature. And so he talks about and emphasizes that people often misjudge situations because they rely on appearances instead of deeper patterns and unseen forces. I think of his books, The Strategies of War, and even in the 48 Laws of Power. Often you have so many folks who either did not plan all the way to the end, they acted off of impulse, they did not have full context. And so their actions were very much assumption-based versus fact-based. And so this extends itself well beyond just business. And so that's why early on I mentioned like, hey, this can impact relationships. It can impact, decisions with family. I've seen it happen within, my own family where, you've had folks like just make an assumption based off of, something that was happened or something that was said. And instead of asking, it's like, man, it caused pain, it caused hurt. And so I've seen it. I've seen it mess up relationships. And so it's very important to have the context as much as possible before making an assumption. And so now let's jump into our positive affirmation of self-alignment, the POS model. This episode primarily is going to support the social emotional learning. This is our primary baseline. Self-awareness is one of them. You want to recognize assumptions, of course, responsible decision-making. You want to pause before reacting. And then lastly, relationship skills, avoiding just misinformed communication. This is how gossip starts, right? So it's very important to avoid that. Secondarily, it hits the spiritual lens. And so just practicing patience and discernment, going back to that piece around folks wanting, they want to conclude with something. They want to have the full story. And so it takes patience, man, to like, if you don't have all the information, to just sit back and wait. And those who have been able to practice patience and just wait things out, oh my goodness, when I tell you, like, they have some of the best results. Because then when they do finally have everything they need, the level of intentionality that they can move with, man, it paces them beyond everyone else. And so that's important. And lastly, academics. We're learners for life, right? And so critical thinking and just evidence-based reasoning is something that is really going to help you push past that urge to be or make assumptions. And then, of course, we always look at the business and the personal development applications. So we're going to start with the personal. So there's three things that I would say to ask yourself, and then we have a reflection prompt for you. So the first thing is, what am I assuming right now? And so whether that's within your workspace, whether that's in your personal life, what is it that you're assuming right now that you do not have full context on? What is it that you're assuming right now that is coming from an emotional space, right? And then what evidence do I actually have? So look at your evidence. And does it align with what you're feeling? And then what could I be missing? And if you take that approach, you'll be a little bit more cautious. And so the reflection prompt is, where have I formed a conclusion without full context, and how did it affect my response? Um, and it's important to do that because nobody likes admitting that they're wrong. And I think, when you have to get to that space, admit that you're wrong, it's kind of like, I got to go back and fix this thing. And so I think if we think about it that way, it's a lot easier to pause and have refrain, you know what I'm saying, and restraint before we just go out and we make a mess of things for ourselves. Professionally, before making decisions or speaking on issues, here's four things. Gather multiple perspectives. Uh, I think we talked about this in the previous episode. In the multitude of counselors, there's safety. I think it's Proverbs like 4:6, something like that. Clarify expectations before overextending yourself. It's great to be passionate about your work. It's great to love what you do. But before you overextend, always clarify, like, hey, if I do this, what is there, any recompense of reward for this thing, right? And so that's okay to ask. And then three, document agreements and not assumptions. If you have something in writing, if something was said, hey, can I follow up with you on that in the email? I just want to make sure that I'm tracking everything correctly. And then lastly, pause before public commentary. And public commentary can be out loud, and the day and age that we live in, that could look like, speaking on social media, from a personal lens, from a career lens on LinkedIn or other platforms that are out there now, Substack and others. And so always pause before public commentary. We have seen how that has harmed so many over their careers. And so for the leadership application or reflection, create environments where context is communicated clearly. And then because silence can breed assumptions, you know, be silent. And for the leadership application, create environments where context is communicated clearly because silence often breeds assumptions. And so if you are not getting everything you need, create that environment where you can get a little bit more clarity, that you can ask for uh, a deeper level of communication within your leadership structure, and provide that if you are one of the leaders. Like, make sure that you're staying open with your teams. So here's our closing reflection for today. Assumptions feel like clarity, but they're often just confidence without confirmation. That's important. And if you're not clear, if you're not careful, you'll often speak from a place of that thought confidence, and it won't be a place from certainty, and you'll end up saying something or doing something that you do not fully understand, which will come back to haunt you later on. So before you react, before you respond, before you decide to do anything, always remember to just pause. Remember that you need to be patient. Ask yourself, do I have that full context, or am I just comfortable with the conclusion that I have? And if you're just comfortable with the conclusion that you have, it may be time to just pause. So because, intentional thinking is not about knowing everything. It is not. But what it is about is making sure that you're in a position to make the decision that's going to be best for you, best for your family, best within your personal life, career, your friendships. And so that is very, very important. So I hope that this episode, this closing episode, has been powerful for you. Remember, assumptions without context is dangerous. This has been From Impulsive to Intentional. You're still on the queue, and we'll see you for our next series.